Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Come on in, believe it or not, 2019, looming large. Who'd have thunk it? 2019. You get to be this old, I hate to say this, but ever since the turn of the century, something about these years and numbers just don't sound right. They just don't roll off the tongue properly. But 2019's coming up, and we're going to return to a reoccurring theme here on Podcast by George, and that's my befuddlement, my confusion, my searching for truth when it comes to the media and this fake news accusation and all of this stuff in the various echo chambers. It's available on mainstream media, I guess, and also, of course, all of the hate-right baloney stuff that you see. And here is just one example. Actually, it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. This was online, the Town Hall website, and this is a columnist named Tanya Gertz. Not familiar with her, obviously. When you hear this, you'll see why. But honest to God, this is something. This is what she writes. For decades, the biased mainstream media have steadily undermined confidence in our country, portraying America as a violent aggressor, rather than the champion of liberty it has always been. With Donald Trump in the White House, their anti-Americanism has only grown more strident. As a high-profile supporter of the president who regularly jousts with liberal media personalities masquerading as journalists, I've seen and experienced this phenomenon firsthand. President Trump pointed out this unfortunate fact in a recent tweet, quoting the president. While CNN doesn't do great in the United States based on ratings, outside of the U.S., they have very little competition, he observed. Throughout the world, CNN has a powerful voice portraying the United States in an unfair and false way. Of all the American bashing media organizations in this country, even including hyper-partisan MSNBC, CNN, she says, is doing by far the most harm to our image at home and abroad. She again quotes one of these tweets. Fox News is much more important in the United States than CNN, but outside of the U.S., CNN International is still a major source of fake news, and they represent our nation to the world very poorly. The outside world does not see the truth from them, President Trump tweeted in 2017. Tanya goes on to say, in the outside world, seeing a heck of a lot of CNN programming, given that the outlet pays to be featured on TVs at airports throughout the world. Back when CNN was still producing generally balanced and objective content years ago, this was a helpful service to travelers, but now that the network has turned itself into little more than an extension of the Democratic Party's resistance to President Trump, it means that hundreds of millions of passengers are exposed to the network's misleading coverage of American politics. Cable news anchors routinely take President Trump's words out of context and misrepresent the facts about national security threats such as the migrant caravan. Meanwhile, amidst the strongest U.S. economy in a generation, they repeatedly diminish the results and insist that a recession is just around the corner. To feed their anti-American narrative, fake news media outlets frequently publish unsubstantiated reports without hesitation or corroboration, such as the infamous error-filled BuzzFeed report containing unverified and potentially unverifiable claims regarding Donald Trump's visits to Russia when he was a private citizen. Their refusal to accurately cover left-wing violence against American conservatives is just, okay, so this goes on and on. This is just a bunch of talking point, baloney-oney stuff. I don't know where to start with this. For one thing, she criticizes, maybe this is the most important thing, this bias and this attempt to conceal the truth by the liberal, left-wing, even mainstream media, and her column was picked up and placed in a lot of newspapers. That's where I saw it. So they obviously are covering this. She talks about how things have changed so markedly since 2000. And no, the big change is politics in America and what's taking place on the American landscape. The coverage has changed because the circumstances have changed. I don't know, and it just goes on and on. And what is the Kool-Aid here? What is she drinking? I just can't. I can't reconcile the fact that there are people like this, and the bigger point is there are millions of people like this, and they're out there voting. They're active. They're engaged. That's how we got Donald Trump. And their representation of the news media is extremely harmful to this country. The news media and its coverage and its standing in the world, that's a First Amendment right. That's something, again, First Amendment. The framers of the Constitution took the First Amendment to deal with this very issue of the freedom of the press. And I don't know, it's something that needs to be dealt with, and we're going to deal with it on a podcast by George. I packed up my mobile recorder, and I went to the campuses of Iowa State University. They've got a great journalism school up there. There's a gentleman up there named Professor Michael Bugeja that has written extensively on this very issue of what's happening with the media, with technology, and with journalism, and we're going to talk to him here on this podcast by George. So let's, through the magic of electronics and the internet and technology, let's go to Iowa State University. Today, we're on the campus of Iowa State University. We're in Hamilton Hall, and we're talking to Dr. Michael Bugeja. He's a professor and former director of the Greenlee School here, where he earned the 2015 Scripps Howard Award for Outstanding Administrator of the Year. In 2017, he won the Distinguished Service Award from the Iowa Newspaper Association. He's got a bunch of awards. They include the Iowa State University Outstanding Administrator Award, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and a National Endowment for the Humanities Grant. Dr. Bugeja also has received several teaching honors, including an Amico Foundation Outstanding Teacher Award and 2 University Professor Teaching Awards, all bestowed by student bodies of major research institutions. Now, I'm getting this from the bio online, and this kind of jumped out at me. He's the author of 24 books.
Yeah. Well, there are many differences, George. One of them is that we have 24/7 access to news and what passes for news, to social media, and to the posts that people do there that passes for news, in addition to any number of fake news sources and sites, coupled with mainstream news sources and sites that have fewer and fewer reporters and more talking heads to tell us how we should feel about the news.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big changes.
Yeah, I'm as guilty as anybody. I get a lot of my information from talking heads. I watch the television news shows in the evening, and I'm a liberal. I'm a lefty. I didn't used to be. I mean, when I was in the news business, I played it down the middle. I was a news and fire reporter primarily, but I did cover some politics. We had a fairness doctrine in place back in the 80s. You had to give both sides of stories, and we endeavored to do that. But I've kind of given up on that. I mean, I'm just telling people I'm on the left. I mean, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at it from a left-wing perspective. When I look at the talking heads like you talk about, let's say MSNBC as an example, to me, those people are speaking, they're selective in what they choose to present. I'll give you that. But to me, it seems to be educated, it seems to be informed, it seems to be truthful. When I flip the dial and I go over and look at Fox and I see people like Sean Hannity, I don't see any of that. Is that me, or is that the way that actually is?
Well, the margins are too low in the middle.
Yeah.
So it's just easier to sell product when you have an audience that you affirm rather than inform. And so if you're left-leaning, then MSNBC is right for you. If you're right-leaning, then Fox is right for you. And then there's that low-margin middle of Reuters, the BBC,
right,
the Wall Street Journal. I think the Washington Post is a little bit to the left. New York Times is a little bit more toward the left.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that they have a lot of conservative writers, too.
Yeah.
That's not to say. But then you start to look at the Atlantic and the New Yorker, which actually pass for mainstream now. And there's ABC News, the breathless ABC News that's there, as if there were never any reports on weather ever made before.
I know it.
you know, and but this is what we have inherited through 24/7 access. We've inherited this climate, And almost everything that we do now is based on affinity group, and that is the political leanings, the social class leanings, the demographics, the psychographics that sell product. In my book, Interpersonal Divide in the Age of the Machine, we spend a lot of time on this very question. Technology does two things and two things only. It was developed by, we're talking about consumer technology.
Yeah.
It was developed by the military and GPS and satellites, and then it was advanced by business to sell. So it surveils and it sells, and almost always does those two things simultaneously. It doesn't matter whether you are putting up new shoes to buy or the latest news from Washington. It goes through that same system, and it's parceled out to affinity groups based on your social media data use, all the machines in the cloud. Maybe it's important for your audience to know that it didn't used to be this way. Up until 2012, we had what was called a knowledge economy, and you gained good jobs, a good education by believing in fact and truth. That was the time when you bought software for your desktop, and everything was in the desktop. Then that got, what didn't get a lot of attention in the news was the big data movement in the clouds. So we went from having our own control over our desktops to cell phones tracking everything we do, every political persuasion that we have, so that data can tell you about you, George. That data can tell what you're going to be doing at any hour of any given day with remarkable precision.
Yeah, they know where I go. They know
where you
what
go,
I'm doing.
where you've been.
Right.
They will pretty much figure out your routine, what you buy, what you eat, what you feel, what you think.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't think this has an impact on the news, then you're not paying attention.
A little naive on that. Yeah.
So while a standard interview with a media ethics professor would be to count the many lies of Donald Trump or the many emails of Hillary Clinton, I'm way beyond that. I'm very practical. I'm a realist. I know what monster we've allowed into our lives, and I try to warn others not to feed that monster.
Yeah, I mean, you can choose not to feed it, but can the course be reversed? Are we forever changed? I look at our society and I look at America. Maybe this is too simplistic, probably so, because I'm a simple guy. But I look at the founding of the nation and George Washington. You know, he never told a lie. That was a big deal with people. And then Abraham Lincoln, and we go up and through FDR, and we come into the modern age of television and movies and John Wayneism in America, I call it, where truth was the absolute most important thing in the world. Now it doesn't seem to be so important. We got a president that's been tracked at 6,000 plus lies, as you mentioned, by some of these newspapers. The most important media are these reality shows to people, it seems like, and there's a lot of deceitful, conniving, lying-type behavior that takes place on those television shows. Is truthfulness becoming less important to us?
We've had a lot of presidents who lied, but they didn't do it on Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't do it repeatedly from 3 or 4 in the morning to the end of an executive president's day. This goes back quite some time. We elected Ronald Reagan, who was an actor.
Right.
And but he also had, he had political experience. He was a Democrat. He switched over to being a Republican. He was a governor. He knew what he was doing, And
but he was an actor. I'm interested that you raised that question or that point. I said back then, you got to be very careful. This guy's trade, his best ability, his vocation is to make you believe that he is something other than what he actually is. That's what an actor does.
An actor does one other thing that President Trump does very, very well. An actor always reinvents himself.
Yeah.
And the media is not the mainstream media is not catching on to this. Every day, President Trump contradicts what he said the day before. That's an actor's reinvention of himself, and he does that particularly well. There is a wonderful book called The 48 Laws of Power, and I think I believe Law 25 is the ability to reinvent yourself and don't allow others to identify who you are and what you stand for. That one of the best things is to always reinvent yourself every morning and define who you are and stick to that as long as you can. There's another law, I think it's Law 43, about timing.
Yeah.
And never appear to be in haste, always walk and strategize slowly, time your disclosures bit by bit. So we have actually Law 25 against Law 43 in President Donald Trump and Robert Mueller, the special counsel. So I look at this from a power perspective. But once you start electing actors and celebrities, you add to the political mix a kind of theater that people get addicted to the same way as many people got addicted to soap operas, or perhaps still do. So what we have going on with the Mueller investigation with President Trump and President Trump reinventing himself and CNN counting the lies and MSNBC reporting it and Fox News minimizing it, I guess I want to say, is just this crazy media culture that we have developed from 24 access news reports in our pocket. Or in our refrigerator, or in our car.
Yeah, the way
it's all over.
Yeah, in our showers, yeah.
I mentioned that we had a knowledge economy up to 2012, and then we moved into a consumer economy. And the consumer economy was empowered by these small chips that you can implant anywhere, and even in people. Not much was said about this. Not much was said in the mainstream media about what would happen. And while we're still talking about truth, lies in Washington, there are engineering companies and computer companies developing robotics. China has an anchor that's an abstract robot that is programmed to deliver the news as the Chinese government wants the news delivered. And it's done in English flawlessly with a robot that looks as better than you or I look.
Yeah.
All right. So we may, while we're talking about President Trump and Make America Great Again, or Hillary Clinton and her server, technology is moving at a tremendous pace, and we're not paying attention to how it's going to change what we hold as true, what we hold as false, what we hold as fact, what we hold as factoid. And you asked if anything can be done about this. I think for most of your listeners, it's over. It's over. I often tell my students, I'm like a sheep at the third go-around in a rodeo. My hoofs are up. Just go ahead and rope me. But I think I do think that the only avenue we have left is education and media and technology literacy as a required course. It could actually start in middle school. But I do believe that that's important.
Well, and the question of education and this enemy of the people thing, I tell people that a lot of what they don't like about Trump, I explain he's a mirror. Trump reflects millions of people that have always been out there. They may have been energized and organized on the internet, but those points of view have been there. But the one point of view that I think is new and different is this enemy of the people thing. I don't remember that. growing up. That's a Trumpism. And those same people, that base, they hold a lot of the same beliefs, but they've taken that belief or they've adopted that, I believe, straight from Trump. I mean, did you see or hear of people believing that journalists were the enemy of the people before him?
Well, most people don't know who journalists are, and they don't know what journalists do. All they know is what they see on Facebook.
Yeah.
And all they know is that the stuff that they don't like is directed at another affinity group than their own. And they don't actually bother to check out those sites, primarily because technology knows you can't sell anything to anybody. I can't sell you a blessed thing, George, by giving you a steady feed of Fox News.
Yeah.
However, I could sell you things by giving you MSNBC. So what happens is then people start listening only to their affinity groups, okay? And then when President Trump mentions something that MSNBC has said, to them, it's just heresy.
Yeah.
It's heresy. But we got to kind of step back. When I told my students about the polar aspects of our electorate right now, is that as journalists, they have to be able to see the audience as it really is, not as they wish it were. That's my definition of objectivity, and you can find that in an article by Brent Cunningham in the Columbia Journalism Review. If you put my name, Brent Cunningham, and objectivity, you'll come up with that, which was curiously just used, I think, by the Trump administration and Pompeo. Did he read my article about objectivity?
I doubt it.
But, that's the problem about our divided country, is that we are so affirmed in our political and lifestyle beliefs that when we confront information to the contrary, we suspect it cannot be true. Now, if you're a politician and you're being criticized by certain media, you can use that to great effect. And I think that President Trump understands this. I think people dismiss how media savvy he actually is. And he's still vibrant this morning with his tweets. Personally, if you want to know my political persuasion, you can look around my office. Take a look.
Yeah.
What do you see?
Yeah.
Hey, tell your audience, what do you see?
George W. I mean, he's up there on the wall.
Yeah, and I think that there's another one over there.
Yeah. Well,
that's in the White House over there with
I don't have my glasses
lady.
on, but
it's
not
Laura
not as far
Bush,
left. Not like me. Yeah.
But I am no longer a mainstream. I am still a mainstream Republican, but I don't identify with the Trump administration. I'm a fiscal conservative and a social liberal, which means I don't have a party anymore.
Yeah, right.
When you think about President George Herbert Walker Bush, I could be more at home with that, particularly with the Disabilities Act that he had passed and things of that nature. But right now, my own personal belief is to help educate Iowa State University students about the power of technology, the nature of technology, and their obligation to find fact and truth and to disseminate that for the betterment of the country.
Has that changed teaching? Has it changed the students at all? When I was in that role, when I was learning, I felt like I was a friend of the people. I thought people liked me. I didn't make much money, but I felt that people kind of admired the business of journalism or reporting when they saw me and interacted with me. How do students respond to the possibility that some people now view them as adversaries?
I think you can make some of those same remarks about many professions. You can demonize the clergy. right?
True.
You can do that, right?
Yeah.
But that's not going to stop people with a calling, is it?
No.
So you can demonize journalism, but that's not going to stop people with a calling, is it?
Yeah.
So what most listeners don't understand is that journalism is a calling. It's a calling to find truth, to hold the powerful accountable. It's to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. It's about serving society. It's also about the Constitution. It's about the Bill of Rights. You can go into politics, or you can do a podcast, and that's another type of advantage that many of my students have. They're very technology savvy, and they do tremendous work. They will have an impact. Will it be the type of universally appreciated journalism of our day? No, is because and that's very simple to understand. When Walter Cronkite signed off, and that's the way it is, there were no voices saying it wasn't.
Yeah.
All right, so we got our news there.
Right.
But what technology has done is change the whole nature of truth. Now, if you step back for a minute, you'll understand my own research on this. Technology affects every system it touches without its nature being changed at all. Introduce it into the economy, and the economy is about technology. Introduce it into education, education is about technology. Introduce it into journalism, and journalism is about the technology. Then you have to look at the nature of the technology and what it's doing. And what it's doing is it's spreading affirmation and marketing all over the place. I think 1 in 5 people now marry based on who they see on a dating site, okay? And they don't understand that the algorithm says if you like this face, then you will probably like this face, and that's how you get matched up.
Yeah.
That's how you sell shoes, George.
Or choose a mate for life.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, right.
And so we're living in this world, and we're immersing ourselves in this world. And without realizing the impact on our psyche and the impact on our duties as citizens. So this is a very complex interview you're having with me.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that going in. It does, cause me to want to do some of the research that you've mentioned. There's a lot of good reading out there that needs to be done by me and others. Before we leave, I wanted to get your reaction to the news today from Time Magazine.
I already read the Guardians of the People.
Yeah.
I think that is so true. One of my dearest students and former advisee at Ohio University, Phil Elliott, is a member of Time Magazine. And at Iowa State University, we go back to Hugh Sidey as bureau chief for the White House at Time Magazine. And Time Magazine's short list had many people we might suspect, but that they came up with Guardians of the People, I think speaks a lot to how I feel as a journalism teacher. It speaks a lot to those of us who remember the Walter Cronkite era and the importance of truth in holding the powerful accountable.
Excellent. Let's leave it there. And I want to come back to this maybe on a future podcast. We get these 25-minute little interviews to kind of get us started, and then maybe in a year or so I'll spin back and we'll revisit this and get caught up a little bit.
Georgia. This has been a very pleasant experience.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening in. I want to encourage, as always, everybody to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and all of those technology platforms that we talked about that are out there influencing our daily lives every minute and every second of every day. So it's Professor Michael Bugeja, and that's another podcast by George.
Mr. Bob Pace.